The day I turned 5, I went to Vietnam and my mother took me to the Buddhist pagoda that she used to pay homage to homage to when she was young, so I could learn about being virtuous in the same way she did. When I arrived at the main hall, I had followed my mother, stepping slowly onto the incense-perfumed carpet towards the familiar echo of a singing bowl. I stopped as my eyes reached an enlarged poster of a wheel segmented into 6, with the upper half depicting heaven and the lower showing the suffering of humans, animals, and spirits. "That's the wheel of life," said my mother. "Everyone inside it lives, dies, and gets reborn until they can get out of it." "Why?" I asked. "Because the world has natural laws. If someone does many good deeds, they will have fortune, and if they commit bad deeds onto others, they will suffer throughout their life to repay that debt. When someone no longer has debt, they will be freed from the wheel," she explained. I stared at the map of the universe in awe. Although the concepts of debt and freedom were foreign to me at the time, this simple model, I thought, made sense. In my mind, this meant that any suffering was not only predestined, but profoundly necessary to attain higher levels of freedom. Later, I exited the back gates of the pagoda, directly entering the streets of Saigon to buy lunch. I optimistically skipped towards the city center, ready to use my newfound understanding as a lens to which I could guard myself from ever doing harm unto others, as well as to peek into the nature of people's past. However, as I got closer, I entered a reality that not only looked challenging, but was challenging for my recently formed worldview. The street was a scene out of any travel documentary, populated with people and their life's work. I felt as if the loud city noise tried to distract me from the difficulties that lie at the heart of Vietnamese life. Glancing down right in the middle of the street, I saw a physically disabled young man on a scooter board yelling out that he was selling lottery tickets for only a few cents while relying solely on his arms to move from inch to inch. Next to him was an elderly woman hunched over, carrying a yoke that bounced very lightly on each side to the weight of recycled glass. And not too far away, on the side of the road were children my age lying on newspaper, in fetal position under the small spots of shade next to their mothers, who squat closely over open fires to cook a variety of food, from fresh sheets of rice crepes to globs of sticky rice. Instantly, I was in a dilemma. Theoretically, if I helped them, would I not just be doing a disservice by preventing them from clearing their debts? I felt my intuition resisting the logic I was newly armed with, which would justify the unjust poverty as a way that the world worked in accordance to natural law. Still, I was conflicted. I approached a mother and her child anyways. She was pouring out another sheet of crepe batter onto the heating plate, and I asked her how long she has been making crepes for. She answered 15 years, before looking warmly over to her son and waking him up to eat. He turned over, revealing limbs that appeared not only strong enough to support his own weight, and eyes that were unreceptive to light and movement. The mother saw me looking and must have felt the need to explain away my gaze. "He was born with neural defects. Those Americans during the war, they did this to him." Born in America, I slightly flinched at the realization that I have been wrong to assume my own innocence while thinking of others as each fully responsible for their problems. This was an innocent boy my age who has not harmed others nor done anything wrong, and even if he had, it would be foolish of me to think I could recognize and delineate all the variables, the causes and effects that constitute to his current state of being. The moment I naively oversimplified people's nuanced realities into general concepts such as debt and repayment, I not only mistakenly concluded people's problems to be fully representative of their past or debt, even when some could be to no fault of their own, but moreover, I convinced myself that the best act of service I could offer in response was to forfeit my agency and feign indifference. My perspective on people has benefited from the recognition that every choice in history belonging to an individual is full of subtlety, and my experience with getting to know the hardship that takes place in my ancestral land serves as a reminder that as I enter the field of law, I cannot make unwarranted presumptions about others, but rather be sensitive and attentive to their story. Pursuing virtue, I realized, was not necessarily about non-intervention, but precisely the opposite. In a society like Vietnam that lacks the healthcare systems, safety standards, and courts to raise about such civil support, I'm reminded that my duty is not to accept the norm and silently feel guilt, but rather to reclaim my agency and utilize it to bring about positive changes in the lives of those around me. In America, from social politics to corporate economics, there is likewise a shared suffering that has to be met with a willing resolve to change those circumstances. Having knowledge of the law will enable me to utilize my agency with attention, awareness, and empathy. Whew. All right, thoughts? Yeah, Alyssa, please.
It's a really beautiful story. Off the top of my head, I do think about one of the examples that you brought up at the beginning of the session about like, I went somewhere else and I have privilege. So that's a theme that I'm definitely thinking about. Aside from that, like if we wanted to like stick with this concept. Like, obviously this person has a lot of empathy and a lot of compassion, but I would be interested in seeing an actual tangible example of how they used that compassion or empathy, instead of just saying like, I went to A and now I possess B inside me. I really need like an example of some time in their adult waking life of like maybe when they use the lessons from this experience to actively do something else. I'm not getting that finished part.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I agree 100%. Yeah, I think the issue here is that this does fall within that travel essay trope I described earlier. So let's say this person presumably might be American. We obviously have to see their resume and such. But the idea here is that this 5-year-old was somewhere else. He or she went to Vietnam and had all these revelations about how life is different over there. Yes. And so the question is, okay, well, you were 5 back then. What have you done since then? You've had presumably 15, 20 years or more to actually implement some takeaway from this revelation you had as a young child. So I'm thinking also, I don't want to read stories about your childhood alone. I want to see something about how you've evolved since then from those experiences, whether positive or negative, into your daily adult life. And so, okay, you were 5 then. Let's say now you're a college student, recent graduate. Maybe you started an organization to help people like those you met or saw in Vietnam. Otherwise, okay, well, you recognize your privilege as someone in the Western world, presumably. What are you doing about it? And I'm not seeing that. And I would imagine it's there. I mean, the person, obviously, they said, intention, awareness, empathy. And I believe that. I don't think that this essay was written simply for brownie points. The question is, so let's see that next step after that, as you said, Alyssa, precisely. So there's lots of room to cut some of the details here. I mean, the details are nice. This is very well written. And as a piece of creative writing, I can picture myself seeing the world through your eyes in that situation. But that's not the only purpose here. Let's get some creative writing, but mix it with that personal vulnerability, what's going on inside your head. And then what's your takeaway moving forward, and what have you done as a result? So there's a chance to highlight something key on the resume, specifically if it does relate to this particular trip or relates to even just helping less fortunate folks in the developing world. Other feedback, other thoughts on this one?
So in my mind, whenever someone presents a story about changing their worldview, generally one of two things in my mind has to stand out about it in order for it to be compelling. The first one is that either it was very difficult for them to change their worldview because of a bias or a preconception, or some sort of journey to the realization. Or alternatively, the realization is profound. In this particular story, I didn't get the sense that they had struggled to change this worldview. In fact, they described it as a recently adopted worldview. And to me, it didn't really seem that the person had a good foundation for, any sort of belief. Rather, not a good foundation, but didn't have a solid foundation for belief, which, being 5 years old, I don't think anybody has. And everybody is going through some sort of growth at 5 years old. And the truth itself was a general truth that everybody should have, not something particularly indicating particular profound growth. So I think that the story is great. I think that the formula, so to speak, is there, but it's not impactful enough as far as how the growth occurred or what general truth was revealed, because I sincerely doubt that when they were 5, they were thinking about how it applies to law school.
Correct. Yeah, that's exactly right. I think that, as we're all agreeing here, that the formula is good and that there is something useful that can be used here. The question is, let's carry it all the way to completion. And as you said, yes, a 5-year-old isn't thinking of all this. So this author is reflecting on what they were experiencing as a 5-year-old. And obviously there was some impact, but it does need to be applied. And so I think that to continue that formula would be to say, okay, well, I went back to Vietnam 15 years later and I did some sort of charitable development work of some kind, or I was engaged in policy as a result of this in some way. And so if there's some extracurricular or work experience or even academic experience that can be tied to this, I think it can make it in a way, as you're saying, suggesting at least, more believable. Now, looking through this, I mean, I'm not seeing too much other than perspective on people, which is kind of vague. There's no action there. Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.